It's often said that the darkest horror stories are not supernatural, but human. And during World War II, hidden deep in Japanese-occupied China, there existed a place so secret and so horrifying that many survivors refused to speak of it for decades. A place where doctors became executioners. A place where science was twisted into cruelty. This is the true story of Unit 731, one of the most chilling chapters in history. The year was 1936. Japan had invaded and occupied Manchuria, a region in northeast China. There, the Imperial Japanese Army created a new research facility. On paper, it was called the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Kwantung Army. It sounded harmless, even helpful. But behind the barbed wire, Unit 731 was nothing short of a house of horrors. The people brought here weren't treated as humans. They weren't called patients or even prisoners. The scientists nicknamed them Maruta, meaning logs, as if they were nothing more than pieces of firewood to be cut and burned. They included Chinese civilians, political prisoners, Korean captives, Mongolians, and even Allied prisoners of war. Men, women, and children, entire families. Inside Unit 731, these logs were subjected to experiments so grotesque they sound like something from a nightmare. Vivisections. Prisoners were dissected alive without anesthesia. Doctors wanted to see how disease spread in a living body. Frostbite studies. Victims' arms and legs were frozen solid in icy water, then beaten with sticks until the flesh shattered. Biological infections. People were deliberately infected with plague, anthrax, cholera, and syphilis. Pregnant women were experimented on, and babies were infected the moment they were born. Weapon testing. Some were tied to stakes, while grenades and flamethrowers were tested on them. Others were locked in chambers filled with poison gas. Pressure chambers. Victims were sealed inside until their bodies ruptured and their eyes literally burst from the pressure. The experiments were cruel, but they were systematic. These were not isolated acts of sadism. They were planned studies, research disguised as science. Unit 731 didn't stop at the laboratory. They turned entire regions of China into experimental grounds. Japanese planes dropped plague-infested fleas over villages. Wells and food supplies were poisoned with cholera and typhoid. Tens of thousands of civilians died slow, agonizing deaths as epidemics swept through the countryside. Historians estimate that while around 3,000 to 10,000 people were killed inside the walls of Unit 731, the biological warfare programs may have caused hundreds of thousands of deaths across China. Daily life in Unit 731 was a twisted version of normal. Doctors and soldiers went about their work as if it was routine. Some even took photos of their experiments. For them, this was science in service of the empire. For the victims, it was a nightmare they could never escape. When Japan surrendered in 1945, the full extent of Nazi atrocities in Europe was revealed. Concentration camps, mass graves, medical experiments. But in Asia, Unit 731's crimes were quickly buried. Why? Because the United States saw an opportunity. Instead of putting the unit's doctors on trial for war crimes, the U.S. struck a secret deal. In exchange for their research on biological warfare, the scientists were given immunity. The data gathered through unimaginable cruelty was considered too valuable to lose. As a result, many of Unit 731's leaders went on to live comfortable lives. Some became professors at medical schools. Others worked in hospitals or for corporations. Their victims were left forgotten. It wasn't until decades later in the 1980s and 1990s that survivors began to speak out publicly. Slowly, more documents were declassified. The truth could no longer be hidden. Today, the ruins of Unit 731 still stand in Harbin, China. A museum has been built on the site, dedicated to preserving the memory of what happened there. But even now, the story remains controversial. Some in Japan downplay or deny it ever occurred. Others argue that the immunity deal allowed the perpetrators to escape justice forever. What is undeniable is the scale of the suffering. Thousands of lives were destroyed, countless families torn apart, and entire villages wiped out in the name of research. Unit 731 is a reminder that the worst horrors don't always come from ghosts, monsters, or myths. They come from people, doctors, scientists, soldiers, people who believed their cause justified their cruelty. It is said that those who cannot remember the past are doomed to repeat it. And the story of Unit 731 forces us to ask, if ordinary men could commit such atrocities, could it happen again? The Second World War had ended, but a new kind of war had begun. One fought in secrets, shadows, and laboratories. In the early 1950s, as the Cold War hardened, the CIA became obsessed with a terrifying question. Could an enemy control a person's mind? Could they extract secrets or even program someone to act against their will? To answer that, the agency decided to try first. They called the project MK-Ultra. Officially, MK-Ultra began in 1953, signed off by CIA Director Allen Dulles, and run by a soft-spoken chemist named Sidney Gottlieb. Publicly, Gottlieb looked like a harmless researcher. Privately, he managed a sprawling secret program that would ultimately include more than 100 subprojects, many hidden inside universities, hospitals, prisons, and private clinics through front organizations and cutout grants. The goal was simple to state and impossible to justify: find ways to manipulate the human mind. The tool that fascinated them most was a new little understood drug, LSD. Researchers inside the program dosed volunteers, and sometimes people who were never told they were taking anything at all, to see how acid shattered perception. Could a sudden psychedelic storm break down resistance? Could it make someone tell the truth or make them suggestible? No one knew. MK-Ultra intended to find out. Some of the testing happened in CIA safe houses under a sub-operation with a disarming name, Operation Midnight Climax. In apartments wired with microphones and one-way mirrors, workers on the agency's payroll invited men over for a drink. The drinks were secretly laced with LSD. Hidden behind the glass, CIA operatives watched what happened, took notes, and tried to learn how drugs and desire could be blended to loosen tongues. It sounds like pulp fiction. It wasn't. Other experiments pushed beyond drugs. There were trials with hypnosis, sensory deprivation, sleep deprivation, electroshocks, and cocktails of barbiturates and stimulants. The idea was to break down the self, strip away memory, habits, and defenses, then see what could be rebuilt. In some cases, funding flowed through anodyne-sounding groups like human ecology foundations to respected institutions, so the CIA's fingerprints didn't show. One of the most controversial figures connected to that outside research was psychiatrist Ewan Cameron at the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal. His work, independently ambitious and partially supported through a CIA-linked funding channel, sought to depattern patients with massive electroconvulsive treatments, drugs, and weeks of induced sleep, followed by psychic driving, recorded messages played for hours on end. The theory was that you could erase a mind's patterns and overwrite them with healthier ones. The reality, for some patients, was profound trauma. Memory loss, broken lives, families who said the person who came home wasn't the same one who'd gone in. And then there's the case that still haunts the project's history. Frank Olson. Olson was a U.S. Army scientist who worked with biological research teams that collaborated with the CIA. In November 1953, during a retreat with CIA colleagues, he was given LSD without his knowledge. Days later, struggling and disoriented, Olson fell to his death from a New York hotel window. For decades, the official story was a tragic accident. Later investigations and family inquiries raised agonizing questions about what really happened in those final days. questions that have never been fully resolved in the public record. Whatever the exact chain of events, Olson became the most visible casualty of a program built on secrecy and risk. By the early 1960s, enthusiasm for LSD as a guaranteed truth serum had faded. It was unpredictable. MK Ultra shifted under successor efforts, MK Search, MK Naomi, but the mindset remained. Find methods to weaken resistance, probe memory, manipulate behavior. Throughout, informed consent was often ignored. Some people signed benign-sounding forms without understanding what they were agreeing to. Others were never asked at all. Then, in 1973, as the post-Watergate era dawned and oversight tightened, the agency moved to cover its tracks. The CIA director at the time ordered most MK Ultra files destroyed. A paper trail that could have answered hard questions, names, dates, protocols, went up in smoke. But secrets have a way of leaking. In 1975, the Church Committee in the U.S. Senate and a presidential panel known as the Rockefeller Commission began digging into intelligence abuses. MK Ultra surfaced, a name without many documents. The public learned that the CIA had funded mind control research, run drug experiments, and violated ethical lines. It was a scandal, but it still lacked detail. Then in 1977, a twist. About 20,000 financial and administrative documents were found in a records center. Files that survived because they had been misfiled. Senate hearings followed. We got our clearest look at how wide the program had spread. Hospitals, universities, prisons, and private researchers, some knowing, some unwitting, were part of a network looking for ways to bend human thought. Witnesses testified. Code names and sub-projects were read into the record. Piece by piece, MK Ultra's outline came into focus. What we still don't have is the whole picture. The destruction of records made sure of that. We don't know every location, every subject, every method, or every consequence. Some victims received settlements. Some never knew they were part of anything at all. And many who participated on both sides of the experiments aged into silence. So what did MK Ultra actually produce? Not the science fiction fantasies its architects once imagined. There was no reliable mind control switch, no guaranteed truth drug, no puppet strings for human thoughts. What the program did generate was harm to bodies, minds, and public trust, and a cautionary tale that echoes to this day. Ethically, MK Ultra collided with the very principles that modern research is supposed to uphold. Informed consent, minimizing harm, independent oversight, transparency. In the wake of broader mid-century scandals, including other unethical medical studies, the United States moved towards stronger rules for human subjects, institutional review boards, and the insistence that people have a real choice before becoming part of an experiment. But the legacy of MK Ultra is not just bureaucratic. It's human. It's the man who took a drink he didn't know was spiked. The patient who checked into a hospital for anxiety and left with their memory shattered. The families who sensed something went wrong but couldn't get a straight answer because the truth was buried under classification stamps. And it's a question that connects directly to the theme of this video. When powerful institutions convince themselves that the ends justify the means, what happens to the people in their path? In one era, it was the body, the brutalities of a wartime lab. In another, it was the mind, the quiet violation of a person's inner life. Different tools, same hubris. MK Ultra reminds us that the line between research and abuse is not just a matter of science. It's a matter of conscience. Once you decide that people are expendable, that their consent is optional, that secrecy trumps dignity, the road ahead always bends toward the same place. Not a breakthrough, a betrayal. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this video interesting, please like and subscribe for more content like this, true crime deep dives, mysteries, and more. Until next time, please stay safe out there, and as always, stay curious.